I want to start from the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, where I studied. So I had my undergrad and MFA there, and currently trying to finish a PhD. Of course, the KNUST, the arts program, which was introduced, was run for many years. And the program was, for a long time, was a bit quite conservative until a group of young professors led by Dr. Caricature and the Black Star Alliance group decided to radicalize it, because at the time, there were certain art practices or forms which were not being taught within the art school. And also students had to really think within certain forms. You know, art is about the expansion of freedom, because in the Ghana flag, in our anthem, we have the freedom and justice and all that. And that is one of the things that art embodies. The idea to be able to take something and transform it into another. So you have Dr. Caricature, Kisiedu Boafo, Georgia Prechum. You have people like Ajman Osei, who was the National Theatre Director and also the Dean of the Performing Arts School in Legon, who have all been very instrumental within these transformative points. When I decided to come to Tamale, the idea was to build a studio or an institution that could somehow allow for younger people to connect to the work of older people. So for instance, there are a lot of really important artists over time, from Ablai Glover, Kofi Dawson, many others who've done really significant work, which if you ask any Ghanaian child about these artists, they probably would not know anything about them. So for me, I thought that it was really important to use the institution or the studio as a space of repair. So you have this, it takes us to, for instance, the market. So also at the end of the day, when we're making art and culture is not so much about, it's not an elitist thing. At the end of the day, we have to find ways in which we can redistribute it. So I used to spend a lot of time going to the Malamata market and other markets around the country, talking with the women there about art and culture, collecting materials like the jute sacks that the cocoa board brings in for transportation of cocoa. And then, you know, when an object is used again and again over a long time, it begins to accumulate memory. And I'm very interested in the memory and how it can speak to us again in multiple timelines. So I would collect these materials and then I would use them to make large-scale installations around Europe. Also, I did it National Theatre and a couple of other spaces here in Ghana at the university, KNUST. My university was very kind to me for a long time. They really gave me space and freedom to practice in ways that if you were in Europe, you could not even do. So those really opened up, for instance, the paradigm to think about ways in which we could start thinking about building cultural institutions that could redistribute, let's say, cultural sensibilities. So it took me back to the history of Ghana in relation to the railway. After slavery had been abolished, when the railway was being built, particularly in the South, at the time when Ghana was the Gold Coast, there were a lot of people that were used as labor to build the railway. And you know, the British had built the railway basically just to extract resources. So it was a very colonial thing. So, and a lot of people from the North also contributed to the building of the railway. People who were taken from the North. So from the images on the screen, you can see that there were a lot of people that were taken from the North that were used in building the railway, but the railway network never extended to the North. Yeah. So if you look at generations that have emerged over the last century, it's very difficult even to talk to kids up here about the ideas of technology around these things, because if you are not even familiar with these things, how does your imagination even open up to them? So I'm interested in ways in which we can take the residues of history and then we can transform it so that it can bring about new cultural imaginations and all that. But something, again, it's not so much about just building things. It's also about the idea of witnessing, because when archaeologists are excavating histories, mostly it's being done in isolation. But I also like the idea that what does it mean to be able to bring these cultural memories or like historical memories, like the railway lines, which would have been scrapped, and then bringing them all the way to the North where they never existed, but the labor is connected to it historically, and then allowing for school kids to witness the building of these things, because there's nowhere in the world, even in the US, as you would even see like the building of these things. It's only limited to the workers who are doing that. But I'm really interested in how these archaeological exercises can bring about new kinds of memory create new kinds of cultural memory. So one of the things that we did was that some of the trains, when I bought them, they had been cut into pieces. And these trains, of course, had been used in like the mines and other spaces. And I had to find the people who had cut the trains into pieces and then pay them to weld the entire train together again. And then for us to transport it all the way up north. So even here in this image, you can see that the train is crossing the Bupe, which was shown just now with the Galamsey and everything. So you can see that even as the train is somehow going through the landscape of the country in order for a search of a new cultural memory or new ideological space and all that, it's somehow crossing through all the contradictions that we're dealing with within our time. And I remember when we got to Tamale, the idea was also to find ways in which we could combine that together with, for instance, these kinds of iconographies like mosque and other things, because we're a country of very strong faith. We're always talking about God and all that, but it's also very important to think about the embodiment of God within the things, the surroundings around that, even trains that we've abandoned. And again, now that these objects are in spaces which seem very alien, how do we make sure that the generation that is going to grow up, this is actively part of their memory in terms of how they inherit a new, because it's almost like a failure, a defunct of history, but we're somehow taking that and we're using that to build a new cultural repository that allows us to be able to think beyond time itself. And again, it's not just about, someone might argue, oh yeah, but it's because the people in the north, maybe they are so-called villagers, they've never seen a train line before. But even the white kids who their parents bring them to the institution and all that, at the end of the day, because it's accessible to everyone and you don't have to pay a dime when you come to it, everyone can experience it the same way. So these kids, they will not be allowed to, for instance, run on rail lines in Europe and other places. But within the cultural institutions or within ways in which we rethink about history, it allows us all to be able to access time the same way. So in this image, you see that we have, for instance, the expats kids excited jumping on the trains, the same as the kids coming from the schools who are doing that. And it reminds me about an image of India where the train is moving and you don't see the train and you just see the people around the train. There are things that we really have to think about in terms of how we redistribute cultural sensibilities. And in Tamale, one of the things that we do actively is to activate the trains by manual labor. So again, if you look at this in relation to history, how people were taken from places to go and build a rail line, but then the rail line never came to these places. What does it mean, again, to bring these objects, the residues of these objects, back into spaces, even if it's not just the north, but in the south, in Accra or other places? What does it really do? It's very important for us to think about those points. And something, at the end of the day, it's about play, because all that I'm talking about is very serious. But at the end of the day, what does it mean to the generation that comes afterwards? If there are kids in Jamestown or in Manguase or like in the Volta region or elsewhere who've never actually had a chance in order to be able to encounter these kind of cultural phenomena and all that, how does it shape the way they think about their being Ghanaian or being citizens of the world from a historical point of view? So inside the airplanes, as you rightfully spoke about in the first place, we use them as classrooms where our colleagues, people like Madi and others, are transforming them into like coding, computing spaces where we teach children how to build computers or how to code or how to fly drones or things like that. The question is that, what does it mean? What does it mean to be able to take an object which would have been lost in time or destroyed and then transform it into something that opens up, let's say, new imaginative points within another generation? So you can see that within our space, like within the institution, we have spaces like the Parliament of Ghosts, where we're even building the spaces, but we are using them at the same time. Because in architecture, when you're building something, normally you have to isolate it until it's done. But it's also important that young people, because we say we're building a country for young people, the majority of the people in this country are young. So at the end of the day, what does it mean even in terms of decision making? because young people are not as irresponsible as most often the system makes it to be. People want to strive and people want to be actively part of decision making and all that. But when we start from an actively young age where we are building institutions and we integrate them into the fundamental aspect of the building, then they begin to understand that the system is being built for them. One day when they inherit it, they can cherish it and know what to do with it. So we work with a lot of schools here from all the senior high schools to like primary schools and all that. And as I was talking about, we show them, we invite the schools, and then we walk them through the building. So it's almost as if they have commissioned us to build these institutions for them or for the generation that comes afterwards. And the institution, because the institution is also a living embodiment of what the ecosystems is. So if we're building an institution, it shouldn't just only be for human beings. We also have to move away from the anthropocentric point of view where everything is about the human. What about plant life? So that's where Galamsey and all these things that come in. How do we respect life in itself beyond the human being into like the trains, the planes, the landscape, and everything that it comes with? So you'll see that it inspires us to build all kinds of spaces, greenhouses, spaces that allows for a combination between technological forms, historical forms, and like modern building techniques. We even go to as far as collecting old pots from the villages where they are more like archaeological objects. They look like dinosaur fossils, which transports us back into time, things like that. So how do we even use a pot from Tolong to somehow teleport our minds, a younger generation, into, for instance, 65 million years ago when the dinosaurs were still roaming the earth? What does it really mean in terms of thinking about fossil fuel and all the things that it has done for humanity in terms of the benefits and also the damages that it has done in terms of like climate concerns and all that. Furniture, which was made out of timber that was cut when the railway was being built in the early 20th century, going around the country, collecting these cultural artifacts and memories and restoring them within the active institution. So our institutions, again, are supposed to be spaces for repair. We're supposed to use our modern institutions in order to be able to restore these phenomena. And this is the last part of the slides where you have even like the smocks that we normally traditionally weave and wear here, where I'm doing a big project in the UK next year for an institution where we're redesigning the fabric, thinking about the cultural phenomena of these fabrics, what they mean within the institutional setting, and even extending it into a space like the Tamale Sports Stadium, where we rent the stadium and we work with over 400 and something people a day in order to be able to sew this material beyond the imagination that normally a weaver would engage this material in. So for me, it's very important when we are thinking about what this repair is. So the repair is not just with regards to, for instance, making a painting or making a sculpture, but it's a systematic thing that we're talking about, which involves infrastructure and all that. And I think there's the last but one image. So now the question is that now that we're talking about repair and all that, what does it mean for this younger generation, for kids to be able to take hold of this? So if kids can be able to go to institutions and take ownership of these institutions, give tours to their fellow kids through technology and all that, we're very lucky. The real Ibrahim, I always say the real Ibrahim Mahama, Mr. Ibrahim Mahama, Engineers and Planners, he gave us this engine from one of his old defunct airplanes, which these things are incredibly expensive. So when I bought the old airplanes, we could never find a jet engine. So these jet engines combined together with the drone tech and other things we're teaching the kids, gramophones and all kinds of archives and other things, creates these new cultural sensibilities again. And I think this also, I like to tell this story a lot because this is a yellow driver in COVID period. He brought two people, visitors from town to the Red Clay, and he was so excited because for him, he never knew that there was an institution like this in Tamale. And he closed work that day because normally we'd say that, oh, these people, like, because every day they work hand to mouth and all that. He went home, closed work for the day, and he brought all the kids from his house. And you can imagine all the kids. He put all the kids in this small tricycle, yellow. And he put a wood on both sides to make sure that they didn't fall out. So at the end of the day, the points that I'm making is that when we build these institutions which everyone can identify with and can access, they then also become the prophet for it, and they can extend it. So if people like this can champion or can extend the institution to, for instance, kids within their community, and for instance, you cannot even get access to drinking water within your institution, then you realize that there's a problem with the system that we are largely contributing to. So this is the last image, and this is basically red clay, where you have the train line running through the institution. So the line, we can see it as some kind of a scar. But in the medical field, when a patient is injured and when they stitch it, it's somehow a repair of the body. The same way I think of as the line. The train line is almost acting as some kind of a scar tissue, which allows us to be able to repair, let's say, memory. It allows us to be able to think about ways in which we can rethink about cultural phenomena and what it can do for ideological growth within another generation. So in here, you can find studios, you can find cinema spaces, libraries, you can find residencies, you can find archaeological spaces, you can find greenhouses, the airplanes which embody these technological forms, drone tech, the trains, farms, all kinds of other things. So the point is that if we truly want the generation that comes after us to inherit a world that they can truly appreciate, and they can also pass it on to another one, then how do we approach it?
Right.
Yeah, so I think I'll leave it here, and then...
Ibrahim, and this is mind-blowing. The way your imagination works, this is mind-blowing. How do we restore memory through cultural productions? And you epitomize that. The red clay, that entire enclave, and the history that lives in that place is amazing. It's amazing. My only question to you, question to you is, how do you do this?
There's a question I also ask myself, something. How do we do this? Because it's very difficult, honestly. But the point is that we are constantly reminded of where we are coming from and also what is possible. I think for a lot of young people, I always tell them that don't think about what exists, but think about what you can produce yourself. That's the only thing that inspires us, because at the end of the day, you ask yourself, it's very difficult to get access to any kind of support infrastructure. You can get access to good roads that even go to the spaces around the country. You can get access to good drinking water. You can get access to constant energy and things like that. But at the end of the day, in us, for instance, I spend a lot of time traveling around the world, teaching and doing many other things. But the more important thing, when you're traveling around the world, you begin to realize that there are places that they invite you to come and teach and do things. I remember some years ago, one of my colleagues and I, Dr. Bernard Jackson, we went to Denmark for like 2 weeks to teach. Every day we'll go to a different school. And at the end of the day, I asked myself, but in Ghana, why can't we be doing this? Why, if you think you are empowered, why can't you, even as a musician, like a filmmaker or whatever you are, you don't need to wait for the state apparatus to be able to do any of these things. Why can't on our own, of course, be able to do it? Because we are privileged. At the end of the day, I can complain as much as I want, but nonetheless, I don't think about the basic everyday survival. I don't wake up in the morning thinking that, oh, what do I eat today? Or in the next 1 year, what do I eat? At the moment where you find yourself in that sphere, you have to realize that you have transcended a certain boundary, and whatever that happens afterwards, it has to be a contribution towards your society and mankind at large.
All right. Thank you very much. And as I watch, and I'm getting a lot of messages from our viewers also, and I'm imagining the transformation that is going through these minds, these young minds, as they get the experience of red clay. One place, they are entering airplanes, jumping onto trains, and they are seeing so much, and it's helping them to imagine. Thank you very much, Ibrahim Mahama.
Thank you very much. My hope is that eventually these kinds of institutions will exist all around the country. And of course, it will inspire beyond culture, medicine, technology, ecology, all kinds of other things. The point about art is not just to stay within its boundaries, but to inspire all other disciplines.